How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to a brand new story. Today we have a story of a girl who does something crazy in class and gets caught by the teacher. You won't want to miss it, so let's just jump right into it. So we're going to call the subscriber who submitted this story Steve. So anyways, right, there was a girl in Steve's class who was kind of known as like the sketchy girl. She was kind of known as the girl who was on pretty thin ice with the administration, all because a couple years ago, because they're juniors now, but back in freshman year, this girl was caught selling adult drinks from the girls' bathroom. And you might be thinking, how did the teachers even figure this out? Well, basically, the teachers were noticing that some of the freshman girls were coming back to class after going to the bathroom a little bit intoxicated, and they were like, what? So instead of trying to bust them individually, they actually almost make like a whole sting type thing. And what they do is they kind of like track like, okay, these girls are normal before they go to the bathroom, and then they're messed up when they go to the bathroom, right? So what they do is when one of the girls leaves, a female teacher basically followed her to the bathroom to kind of like walk in intentionally on this girl who walked to the bathroom, handing a $10 bill to the sketchy girl, we're just going to call her the sketchy girl, who was handing this girl a beverage. Yeah, so this girl has been on thin ice for quite a while at this point. So everyone kind of knew. She got a bit of a reputation from that. She's also been known to like smoke in the back of the school or something. So she's definitely more of like an edgy out there type of person, right? So this story all started one day. Steve had a class with this girl, and it was a math class, and it was an incredibly hard math class. It was like one of those more advanced whatever math classes. And Steve was really confused why the sketchy girl was in there because, you know, normally when you're preoccupied in high school with activities like she was, you're normally not as, up to it with your schoolwork. But apparently she was, which, I mean, I guess good for her, I guess. That's cool. But, or at least that's what Steve thought. And he would learn pretty quickly that that was not actually the case. So they recently got back a test that was pretty difficult. And every week they had a quiz, and the quiz grades were pretty substantial to their final grade, and they also would occasionally have tests, right? So they just got a test back, right? And Steve did not do well. He got below 60. He was not happy about it, but he also felt like he studied pretty hard. And this is when the sketchy girl went up to him after class. And this was really weird because Steve and the sketchy girl they never spoke before. This was the first time that they'd ever talked to each other. So this was very weird. She comes up to him, and she's like, hey, Steve, how'd you do on that test? And Steve was just so thrown off guard that this girl was talking to him that he kind of was like, not the greatest. And she was like, oh, well, I got 100%. And Steve's like so confused. First of all, super confused that this girl came up to him. Second of all, he's super confused that she got 100%. Because he's like, how did you get 100%? Because, I mean, maybe he was just judging a book by its cover, which you shouldn't do. But at the same time, Steve was like, that's really hard. Even people that studied really hard for that didn't get 100%. And, Steve was like, congrats. And she's like, Steve, you and I both know that I did not get this 100% legitimately. Legitimately, I probably wouldn't have even gotten a 0% unless I wouldn't have even gotten 10% unless you get 10% credit for putting your grade on the paper. And Steve was like, I mean, I didn't want to say anything, but you just didn't seem like the student to really get 100 in that class, so I was pretty confused. And she said, what if I could tell you that I could guarantee you that at least half an hour before any test or quiz, I can get you every single answer with 100% accuracy. And Steve was not one for cheating, but he also was one for going to college. When you get caught cheating, college gets much, much harder, but he also knew that like he needed his grades to be competitive, or at least he felt that way. Maybe you don't actually need it, but he definitely felt that way. So he was like, I don't know, like that sounds a little sketchy. And she says, you know what? Okay, we have a quiz next week. I will get you 30 minutes before class or sooner. I will give you the answers for free of charge. And if I'm right, well, then I'm right, and you can consider going with me later on. And if I'm wrong, well, then, it's not like you're going to do well in that quiz anyways. And Steve thought about it for a second, and he realized that she was right. He was not going to do well in the next quiz either way. And if she's offering this for free, he might as well see how it goes. So the next week comes around. And about 2 hours before class, She comes up to him, just finds him randomly. It's very strange and abrupt. Steve's taken aback by the fact that this girl just comes out of nowhere. It's like, hey, Steve. And he's like, oh my God, what? But anyways, he's like, yeah, hey, what's up? And she's like, so our little conversation a week ago, I follow through. And she hands him this little slip of paper. It's a very, very small slip of paper. And she said, just in case you don't want to memorize these, I put this on a little slip of paper so it'd be nice and discreet for you. I'm always looking out for you. Look, I don't charge much for these. I charge $5 a week, 10 for quizzes, and $10 for a test. Sounds like a lot, but I'm also guaranteeing you 100% on these. If this doesn't go well today, then you don't have to follow up and you can cancel at any time. And Steve was looking at her like, oh, okay, I guess. And Steve was very morally conflicted if he wanted to do this at all, but he went in, he took the quiz, he did cheat on the quiz, and it turns out he got all the questions correct. So Steve, at this point, who was already struggling pretty badly in this class, decided to go with the girl. So sure enough, gave her $5, and every single week, unless it was a test, which was coming up, and that's like where things really hit the fan, right? But for every week, he'd give her $5. She'd give him the test answers way ahead of time, and they'd always be right. And Steve didn't totally know how, but, he would start to hear remarks in class of the teacher saying, you guys have really pulled it together. At least a group of you guys have really stepped up to the plate, and I'm really proud of that. He said the rest of you guys should, take note of your classmates that are stepping up and do the same. The truth was, this girl was just selling to about a third of the class. And about a third of the class were consistently cheating and consistently doing better. So the teacher took this as a third of the class was just really stepping up to the plate. Real quick, subscribe if you haven't, if you like stories. I'm trying to hit 1 million subscribers, as a golden play button would be pretty cool. Anyways, the teacher really just genuinely thought that the kids were putting in the effort and really trying. But the truth was the kids were just, they're just cheating. So everything went really downhill on the day of a major assessment. So this coming Friday, or in the timeline of this story, the upcoming Friday was of a major test. The quizzes, sure, happened every single week, and they did, it was like a good part of his grade, but really majorly were the tests, unfortunately, or not unfortunately, but just it was a matter of fact. The tests were the big things that you got graded on. And a really major test was coming up. So obviously everyone who, relied on this girl were really relying on her to get the test answers. So sure enough, people on the day of Friday, Steve, who didn't even study for this test, Steve really did play himself, but Steve didn't study for his test because he expected that as what had happened every single week, he was going to get the test answers before. Yeah, sure, he felt a little guilty about it, but whatever. So, he's waiting, and he starts to panic a little bit because she isn't getting back to him. And he also has no way to contact her. He never got her Snapchat, never got her number, never got any of that. So all of a sudden, Steve is starting to realize that, okay, it's 30 minutes before my test, and I do not have the answers. Okay. So yeah, Steve starts to whip out the book. He's looking at it. It's all looking like Roman numerals to him, or just like, it's looking like a different language right now. And Steve kind of realizes that he's low-key played himself. So Steve walks into the test room. And about a third of the room looks a lot more nervous / freaked out than the rest of the other 2/3. The reason for this is the third of the class that relies on the sketchy girl to give them answers did not have the answers, and they were walking into a massive test. There's only like 2 or 3 tests throughout the entire year, so if you fail one of them, recovering your grade is incredibly difficult. And they all probably did the same thing as Steve and just didn't study since they knew that they were going to be guaranteed some answers. Anyways, the teacher walks in with the tests. It's like a minute before the tests start. And most of the kids get there at least 5 minutes early. And as soon as the teacher walks in, guess who walks in behind him? The sketchy girl. The sketchy girl walks into the classroom, is super disheveled, and has a bunch of little pieces of paper in her hand. And that's when Steve realizes that the sketchy girl has the answers in her hands, but instead of giving them to them like 2 hours before, as she normally would and as she said she would, she's going to attempt to give them out during class as the teacher is coming around. It is one of the biggest risks, and it is the dumbest thing ever. And Steve can't believe it, but as soon as she gets in there, she starts walking around, handing out little slips of paper to certain people. She is bound to get caught at this point. Real quick, you've made it this far into the video. Secret word will be caught. Yeah, caught is the secret word of the day. I'll try and heart as many of those comments as I can. If you want to farm some hearts and maybe become top commenter, it's a good way to do it. Anyways, right, so Steve is just watching as the sketchy girl is walking around class, handing out slips of paper to basically everyone who ordered them. And Steve is like, at this point, I think I'd rather fail than get caught, because cheating was held pretty high at the school or whatever. It wasn't good. So the teacher is turned around while she's doing this, and I think the sketchy girl is really banking on this, because she's almost like running down the aisles, quickly handing it out, and she's coming up to Steve, and Steve's like, oh no. So sure enough, the teacher turns around though, and sees that the girl is running around handing out these little slips of paper. The teacher immediately finds it really sketchy. So he's like, hey, sketchy girl, says her actual name, but we'll say sketchy girl. Hey, sketchy girl, what's that you're handing out there? And she just freezes. It's funny, because that's like probably one of the most suspicious things she could do. Instead of saying, I didn't do it, officer, please, no. But yeah, so she just kind of freezes. Turns around and says, what? Instead of saying like, oh, I wrote little nice notes for my friend. I don't know what you could really say in that situation, but she really tried to deny that she was handing something out, which immediately made it suspicious. I mean, I don't know how you say, oh, I'm not running around with something in my hands, while simultaneously running around with something in your hand. Like, I just don't know how you say that and think you're going to get away with it, you know what I mean? But anyways, right, sure enough, the teacher does not buy this, because he has eyes. He can see. Sure, he's getting older and his vision isn't great, but he doesn't see in like 240p, right? He can actually see that she's holding stuff in her hand and also handing stuff out. So the teacher starts to power walk towards her. Doesn't even ask, hey, can I see it? Just starts approaching her. And the girl starts to like panic a little bit. And she like shoves all the papers into her pocket. The teacher comes up to her. He's like, what were you handing out to these students? And the students that were sitting there with the little slips of paper on their desks were starting to panic, because they realized that if the teacher catches the girl handing out like the cheat notes or whatever, not only will the girl get in trouble, but they'll get in trouble. Thankfully for Steve, the subscriber, she did not get around to him yet. So while he was still kind of freaked out in general, he wasn't like seeing a death sentence ahead of him, right? So anyways, the teacher looks at her and says, show me one of the notes, show me one little piece of paper you're handing out. And she's like, what do you mean? And the teacher, instead of being like, empty your pockets, whatever, stuff like that, he literally turns around, grabs one of the pieces of papers off someone's desk before they could hide it, because most of the other people had like hid the desks or hid the paper. But I think he made a mental note. I think the teacher made a mental note of who had what. But anyways, he picked up one of the pieces of paper, he uncrumpled it up, and he was just looking at it. And he was shocked. There was a shocked expression on his face. The teacher knew for a fact that whatever was being handed out was pretty sketchy, but even this was a little much for him. Even this kind of made him go, whoa, okay. So the teacher looks at the girl and says, you're going to come with me for a second. And then the teacher turns around and says, you, and points to every single person who he saw receive one of the pieces of paper. And says, you guys, you're also coming with me. The rest of you, you may start your tests now. So at this point, Steve is just like, oh my God. If the teacher had like turned around for longer, the girl would have come around and given him a piece of paper, and then probably would have still gotten caught, but then he would have gotten lumped in with the entire thing, and he would have been sent to the principal's office as well. So what ended up happening was, since this girl was on such thin ice, and she turned out to be selling a ton. Like, she was getting a lot of money each week. And real quick, how she did it was, the teacher would make the test a day in advance. He would print out all the copies, and he would leave it in his room overnight. So the girl would get there really early, or she would stay really late, and she would find a way to sneak into the room. I think it was locked every night, but like one of the windows was left unlocked or something. She found a way to cheat in or something, because I guess she just wanted to figure out how to pass the class easily while still, not doing any work. And that's how she did it every single time. And yeah, and the rest of the kids, the thing is too, it wasn't just her that got punished because she got full on expelled. She was not allowed back at the school because she was on extremely thin ice already. But all the other kids that got caught cheating, they received on their transcripts that they got a note that they were cheating, right? They all got suspended for a couple days, and they had like an academic dishonesty, whatever. If you don't know, colleges take that pretty personally, at least when they're looking at your applications. So they all got screwed. And the thing is, right, Steve had a really close call, and I'll tell you that story right now. It's quick, but it's really interesting. So anyways, Steve bombs his test. Terrible, like 30%. It's awful. He does terribly. So the teacher calls him up after class. And Steve was the only one who she didn't get to. Steve would have been the last person who she would have given the little slip to, right? I think she made too many copies or whatever. She was doing it quickly. She did a rush job, right? But Steve was like the last person she wasn't able to give a cheat sheet to. And he was also the only one who really strayed away from the normal. Like, Steve was getting 95s. Steve never got 100s because he didn't want to fill in all the answers correctly. But Steve was getting 95s at least when he was, like, cheating, right? So the teacher calls him up and says, Steve, this test didn't go so well. How come you did so well on the previous test, in the previous quizzes, but on this test it just didn't come together? And Steve was looking at him like, oh, no. Because the thing is, it's pretty obvious, right, that if you just caught a bunch of people cheating, but you also low-key know that, not everyone was caught who was cheating, and then one student who is doing great on the quizzes and great on the tests all of a sudden bombs this test, where the test is really just a compilation of the quizzes in a sense. So Steven says, hey, I'm so sorry. I was really stupid, and I stayed up all night the night before, so I got literally no sleep. I came in, my brain wasn't even functioning. It was the stupidest thing I've ever done, and I'll definitely be paying for it with my grade. The teacher looks at him, and Stephen to this day does not believe that the teacher believed him. To this day, Stephen believes that the teacher really just decided not to press any further, because the teacher says, okay, please get some sleep before the tests. I know I don't need to tell you twice because you're the one who's going to get the bad grade, but please get some sleep. It's really important, especially before you take a test. Just use your brain next time. And Steve's like, yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. He sits back down. Sure, Steve has a 30% on that test, but you know what he isn't? Suspended for 3 days with a permanent thing on his record. So Steve, even with the 30% on this test, feels like he's a lucky
Click on the
man.
video on screen right now. I know you'll enjoy it. Just click it. Do it.